Chapter 1. The Ghost of Castle Cosel. I was born in Dresden, Germany, in the town house of our family called the Castle. But there was another castle, the Via Cosel, out in the country, and it was there I grew up. This latter manor had the reputation to be a haunted house, and the white woman whom my mother told me had appeared from time to time during the past 2 centuries was supposed to be my ancestor, the Countess Cosel, who died in 1765. Hers is quite a romantic history, moreover, since her apparition to me was the beginning of my relationship to Elena. I will briefly narrate her story. In the Rococo age, when August the Strong, who became King of Poland, ruled over Saxony, the young Countess Cosel was one of the most celebrated beauties in this notoriously licentious court. She actually was the king's bride, as recorded. Family documents seem to prove that she was engaged to marry the young king. At the very height of her beauty and at the point of becoming a queen, she fell in disfavor through the machination of some Polish countess for reason of jealousy. August the Strong exiled my ancestor from his court and made her a captive for life at the gloomy fortress of Stolpen because she refused to return the certificate. For almost half a century, she lived there in solitude, which toward the end of her life impaired her sanity. For decades, however, she was able to find a new interest in life through the pursuit of alchemy, the hobby of the learned and the noble in those times. As a young man, I went to see the fortress of Stolpen, once headquarters of Napoleon, where the living quarters and the laboratory equipment of my ancestor were well preserved. Being a chemist and physicist myself, I can witness to the fact that she must have conducted her experiments with great intelligence, even if her quest for the Stone of the Wise was vain. Family tradition has it that her knowledge in chemistry enabled her to ward off several attempts on her life through poisoning. As a young boy, however, I had no interest in the family tree, and the existence of a ghost in the manor was never mentioned to me, nor entertained. True enough, at the age of 12 I had a dream, or rather a vision, of a very beautiful girl in a white dress, reclining on a rococo settee, which I painted on a piece of paper then. My boyish interests were, however, entirely concentrated on electricity, on chemical experiments, and on flying machines, astronomy, in fact, on all phenomena of the universe. While still at high school, fascinated by the saga of the Flying Valkyries, I built myself a glider plane. I tested this contraption from a hill in the park, but then the giggling of the maids embarrassed me so that I continued flying experiments only after midnight, to the alarm of the superstitious dogs of the peasantry. Likewise, by the time I went to college, I had established in the green room of the manor a fairly big laboratory for high-voltage electricity. The garden hall I had converted into a workshop wherein I built 1 boat and 2 hot air balloons made from Japanese silk, which it took my mother and a needlewoman months to sew together. I had no interest outside science, music, and paintings. Girls did not exist for me except formally, even as I went to university at Leipzig and I did neither smoke nor drink. Time seemed too precious to me for such pursuits of a momentary happiness. Engrossed in science after science, I took, at the age of 24, final degrees as Master of Arts in Medicine, in Philosophy, Mathematics, Physics, Chemistry, etc., having passed 9 different examinations beside the SM. I was sitting in my chair in the green room. Piled on the large round table were writing materials from the college, books and laboratory instruments. Over the table there was hung a heavy kerosene lamp with a green shade which cast a bright light. There were outlined the static machines and all the other equipment. Toward the back, the room was divided by a large curtain which enclosed my photographic darkroom, wherein I used to develop the X-ray pictures I made. All was bright behind that curtain, which I wanted to be very dark. To complete the picture, all doors, of which the green room had several, were locked, except the door to the adjoining music hall, which was furnished splendidly with a lit piano, an organ, chairs, chaise lounge, settees, Florentine table, life-size Venus de Milo, and an easel on which there stood a picture I once painted of Judith, the beautiful Jewess who slew Holofernes. Besides, there were several large oil paintings of Italian masters in gold frames hanging on walls, also 10-feet-high mirrors and armor. The hour was late, about 11 I should say. I felt tired, but my day's work was not yet finished. Suddenly, without looking up from my papers, I noticed a movement near my side. It was a pencil lying on the table. It moved slowly half across the table. As I looked at it straight, it stopped moving, but the moment I turned my eyes back to work, I noticed from the corner of my eyes how it started again. Scientific training had taught me the first law in the observance of phenomena. Don't change any of the existing conditions. This, however, does not apply here. I merely paid little attention to it and kept bent on my work. Then it lifted itself off the table, performing a few somersaults in the air and flying down to the floor. Now a matchbox started walking about the table, lifting itself, gyrating in the air. Suddenly it went sailing to the floor also. Then there followed my books, a fact which was all the more ironical to me because these scientific books contained the laws of nature in which I implicitly believed. Yet these venerable books took to the air, lifted by some unknown force, and crashed to the floor. The instruments on the table followed one by one, except the few which were screwed to the table. My amazement I cannot even try to describe. Finally, the entire heavy oaken table with the papers in my immediate reach still on it lifted itself off the floor and floated upward as if carried by water. I was forced to get off my chair and retreat a little for safety. The table weighed more than 200 pounds, and I was afraid to get crushed if it came down. Up and up the table sailed, almost touching the kerosene lamp at the ceiling, and then it came swaying down, slow at first, but then with a crash which made the floor reverberate. I had retreated to the neighborhood of the large curtain which screened my darkroom. I almost touched the curtain when suddenly flames flared up and came running along the curtain's surface, gaining in intensity. Still more curious than frightened, I moved away and noticed how the flames crept to the ceiling and then went out. Yet there was no smoke, but there was a smell of burn, and as my fingers probed the curtain's surface, they were darkened by ashes. I still tried desperately to find some reasonable explanation. The nearest matchbox was at least 6 feet away, and it was closed, when another uncanny phenomenon manifested itself. There was a noise like the report of a gun from the direction of my static electricity machine. Walking over to see what had happened, I found that all of the 4 huge central glass discs had been broken right through the middle. The outside glass plates of the glass case still were intact, and so were the condensers. The damage made me really angry. The expensive machine was now quite useless. After a few minutes of gazing at it, I heard footsteps coming through the adjoining music hall. I fixed my eyes to the door, wondering whether it could possibly be my mother because she only had a key to my door, when suddenly the door opened into the darkened room, and to my utter surprise I found that my easel had just been overturned and the picture I had painted of Judith was lying on the floor with the glass splintered, and also the picture itself torn across the face through the middle. I was not frightened or anything like that. I still believed in some kind of a prank, or maybe that there was a thief or prowler in the house. My next step was to test all doors and windows which I found securely locked, and to search every nook and corner for a possible intruder. From the top drawer of my desk I had taken a loaded revolver which I always kept there. While still searching the bedroom I heard a renewed news in the green room, and in returning there my eyes met the strangest sight. All the chairs in the room had a lively time moving and poltering about, agitated by an invisible agency. No harm was done, and the sight was even funny. I realized that in the face of the supernatural I was rather a ridiculous figure, standing there, revolver in hand. So I put the revolver back into the drawer, sure by now that this was no man-made trick. But then the harmless dance of the furniture turned into something more malignant. I heard another crash, this time from inside the cabinet, and as I opened its door I found one of my mercury pumps, which I kept there, smashed. It's 50 pounds of mercury running over the floor on which the splinters of glass floated. This was another heavy damage running into hundreds of dollars, so my anger was aroused. If this is by any chance the spirit of the Countess Anna who perpetrates all this, please give me a prompt answer. I had hardly finished this sentence when my second mercury pump, fastened as it was to the wall, came crashing down to my feet, spilling also its contents all over the floor. "What is the idea of all this destruction? Why don't you tell me in a more civil way?" I exclaimed. After that, everything was still. Nothing moved. It was as if the spirit, or whatever it was, had understood. I looked at my watch. It was 2 minutes past midnight. Feeling that the demonstration was over and that there was nothing I could do for the present, I retired to bed because everything was silent as the grave. Upstairs in the dining room at breakfast next morning, I told Mother about my nocturnal adventures, and it was then that she told me the green room was supposed to be haunted for ages. Mother was as little frightened of the ghost as I myself, but I found her very much interested. In fact, she asked me to install an electric bell which would connect her bedroom with my study, so I could call her immediately if the apparition should appear again. She declared she had heard some crashes last night and had felt the floor tremble at one time. The next night I invited several guests, all professors and doctors of Leipzig and Dresden, in the green room. One doctor came later bringing his wife, who was a good medium, but nothing happened except this lady, in virtually 1 minute, was driven out by an invisible agency and had to be taken away at once. Otherwise nothing happened, so that the gentleman departed. In the third night, however, I was mysteriously awakened at around 2 a.m. I hardly believed my eyes. There were, however, standing by my bed 2 women, one bending over my face, a tall lady with snow-white hair, a striking likeness to the portrait of the Countess Anna, which I remembered so well. The second figure kept somewhat behind her, as if trying to hide, and the Countess held the reluctant younger lady by the hand. Bending still lower and staring at me, the Countess Anna addressed me as follows. "I've been trying to attract your attention for quite some time, my boy, but you wouldn't take note. You were too much engrossed in your experiments. That's why I had to use some violence. Now take warning. Do not entangle yourself with the woman represented on the Judith picture. Don't get ensnared by her. She isn't the one who is destined for you. Look here, Carl, I have brought you the bride whom someday you will meet." I tried to answer something, but I could not speak. I had plenty of words, but I could not open my jaws. The Countess now stepped a little aside, and at the same time she drew her companion nearer to me. For a very brief moment the veil parted from the shrouded figure's face. Spellbound, I saw, framed in long, dark black tresses, a young girl's face. So beautiful I can't attempt to describe it. For a fleeting second I saw the girl smile at me, a wonderful smile. But at that moment the Countess Anna detached herself from my arm, which she had touched, and the apparition quite suddenly disappeared. Strange as this may seem, I was in no way overexcited. It all seemed very natural, if very wonderful to me. With a feeling of relief and quiet happiness, I just noted the time on my clock, 2 o'clock, and then fell back into sound sleep. This then was the manner in which what most people would call the supernatural entered into my life. I did not know at the time that this experience was to be formative for the whole rest of my life. My personal reaction to the experience was wholly scientific. Deny the apparition I could not. Rational explanation I had none. Determined to find a rational explanation, if I could, I started studying the metaphysical classics, in which until then I had not interested myself, and the more psychological and spiritist literature. This, however, I found to be of little help. It became increasingly clear that I had to navigate my own course into this vast unexplored sea, though Kiesewetter and Duprel's metaphysic gave me a good foundation, which is a necessity and safe guide in this field of ethereal phenomena. One of my first steps was to visit again the fortress of Stolpen, where my ancestor had been confined. In the wing of the fortress chapel I found under the rubble a small square stone which may have been from the grave. Ivy had grown on the spot, a vine of which I had put into my pocket as I dug into the stone rubble supposed to be her grave. On my return home I found this vine and planted it underneath the window of my study over the entrance of a subterranean tunnel. In my writing desk I also placed a piece of bone and a few splinters of wood which came from this grave of my ancestor. The vine grew fast, and it gave me a strange feeling to picture it some day framing my window when I would look up from my work.